You know what would make Christmas perfect? If Mom just stopped existing. I heard it as clearly as the ticking clock above the stove. No music, no laughter, only the slow click of the second hand and the breath I forgot to take. I was folding towels fresh from the dryer, warm clouds of cotton still breathing out heat, when Daniel's voice slipped through the cracked kitchen door and wrapped around my throat. I held a red towel in my hands like it had turned to glass. My fingers went careful and then useless. I could not feel them anymore. Erica answered with the kind of lightness people use when they are choosing napkins for a party. You said it, not me. There was a quiet after that. A heavy, wobbling quiet that made the lights over the kitchen island look like they were underwater. I waited for Daniel to laugh, to say he was joking, to say anything human. The only sound was the soft thud of the refrigerator closing and the scrape of a chair across wood. I pressed my palm flat on the counter to steady myself. The towel slipped from my hands and fell, a slow collapse of red against the floor. I did not cry. Tears felt too loud for a house that had asked me to be invisible. I picked up the towel because that is what mothers do when the world breaks. We finish the task. We keep moving. I stacked it on the others, squared the corners, then lifted the basket to my hip like it could hide the tremor in my arms. My chest ticked with the clock. I counted each breath as if I could inventory the pieces of me that were still mine. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon and lemon cleaner. Erica loved the clean look of winter, glossy counters and staged fruit. She hated my old teapot because it looked tired. She hated the family photos from before, the ones with yellowed edges and my husband's crooked smile. Not our aesthetic, she would say. I learned to tuck my life into a small shape. My room was the in-law suite at the back of the house. A polite way to say you belong near the door. I climbed the short stairs to that room and closed the door without making a sound. There is no lock. There was never a lock. They liked being able to reach me anytime they needed a babysitter or help finding the warranty for the dishwasher or a ride for the kids when schedules collided. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the blank wall. Off-white, good for resale, Daniel had said once. The heater hummed like a tired animal. I lifted the drawer of the bedside table and took out the small brown notebook I keep for lists and reminders. I turned to a clean page and wrote the sentence exactly the way he said it. You know what would make Christmas perfect? If Mom just stopped existing. I read it 3 times. Words have weight when you write them with your own hand. I wanted to add a question mark where he had not placed one. I wanted to soften the blow to something survivable, but there it was. Whole. I closed the notebook and held it between both palms like prayer. People think betrayal is a scream. Sometimes it is a quiet room and a clock that refuses to hurry. My mind did what minds do when they are drowning. It gathered what it could. The last 5 years, the day I wired them $140,000 because the bank had turned them down, the realtor asking whose name would go on the deed, and Daniel saying, "We are family, Mom. Put yours too. It will make you feel secure." The promise I would always have a place here. The way that promise shrank into rules about which bathroom I could use when guests came over. Do not move the couch. Do not rearrange the pantry. Do not put your shoes by the door. The words do not and do not and do not, until I became the space between them. On the dresser sat my husband's old chair cushion folded into a square. He loved that chair. I kept the cushion when the chair would not fit in the new house. I ran my fingers over the worn edge and remembered the weight of his hand over mine when Daniel was small and feverish. He would say, "Listen, Maggie, a child learns love by the temperature of the room you create." He has been gone 10 years. I have worked so hard to keep the room warm. Downstairs, someone opened a cupboard and a stack of plates clinked. I could smell the pine from the tree in the living room and the faint metallic scent of tinsel. My stomach tightened like a fist. I stood, opened the closet, and looked at the suitcases. One still had the airline tag from a trip I never took. I had canceled it when Daniel's hours were cut and he needed help with the mortgage. I slid the small case out and knelt. There is a seam in the lining where the stitching is imperfect. I tucked things there after my husband died because grief had taught me how fragile a plan can be. My fingers found the envelope labeled Plan B. The paper felt cool and serious. I did not open it. Not yet. I needed to feel the possibility before I invited it into the light. I placed the envelope on the bedspread and smoothed the fabric around it. The room adjusted itself around the shape of choice. The house creaked as it settled into night. I could hear the television in the den, a game show audience clapping for a stranger's luck. A car passed outside and hissed over wet pavement. I stood at the window and watched the first snow begin, a thin powder that turned the street lamps into halos. Somewhere in the house, my grandson laughed, a sweet, clear sound that made the snow look softer. I leaned my forehead to the cool glass and closed my eyes. When I opened them, the world was the same and entirely different. I sat at the desk under the window and drew a line down the middle of a fresh page in the notebook. On the left, I wrote what they have taken. On the right, I wrote what I have left. Under the first, I listed time, savings, furniture, holidays, my voice at dinner, the ease of walking into a room. Under the second, I wrote my name on the deed, a passport, a friend who will pick up the phone, a small sum only I know about, and the stubborn part of me that refuses to die simply because someone wished for it. I want to speak to you for a moment, the person listening who knows this kind of winter. This is Grandma's final chapter. We tell stories that do not apologize for their truth. If you have ever heard a sentence that cracked your heart, stay. This story will speak for you. If you find strength in it, subscribe and tell us where you are listening from. We show up every day for older adults who deserve a life that is happy and self-directed. Your voice helps us reach the ones who need it most. I closed the notebook and picked up the envelope again. My hand did not shake this time. The snow outside thickened, and the lawn light blew a halo across the yard. I could see my reflection in the window, a woman with silver at her temples and a spine that had learned to bend too far. I did not look broken. I looked awake. I whispered the sentence once more. If Mom just stopped existing. I tasted it and then spit it out in my mind. I am not a ghost. I am not a piece of furniture. I am Margaret Hayes. I exist. And tomorrow, I would begin to prove it. When I woke the next morning, the house was still. I could hear the soft mechanical hum of the heater below the floorboards and the distant drip of rain against the gutters. The snow from last night had melted into a pale mist that pressed against the windows. My room felt like a cell that someone had tried to decorate into politeness. The white paint was unmarked, the curtains a neutral beige that never quite shut out the light. It was a room that asked me to disappear quietly. I sat up slowly, the blanket pooled around my waist. There was no lock on my door. There had never been. It was Daniel's idea when the house was built. "We don't need locks," he had said. "We're family." I used to think that sounded warm. Now it felt like surveillance. The door could open any time, the illusion of privacy always ready to vanish. I looked around at the space that had been given to me, as if charity could replace dignity. The bed was narrow, the dresser small, the single chair pressed against the wall like an apology. It smelled faintly of lavender from the sachets Erica tucked into drawers for aesthetics. My own things were contained in 2 suitcases and a box of photographs I no longer displayed. Every corner of the room reminded me of the quiet erasures that had taken place since I moved in. When I first arrived 5 years ago, I thought this room would be temporary. I sold my own house after Robert died and moved here to be closer to the grandchildren. The first months were filled with promises, family dinners, shared mornings, little footsteps running into my room with laughter. Then rules began to appear, small at first. Don't use that mug, it's part of a set. Don't water the plants, I've arranged them by color. Don't leave your knitting on the sofa, it makes the room look cluttered. I followed each rule because peace felt easier than confrontation. I told myself that love sometimes asks for compromise, but over time, compromise became silence, and silence became habit. I opened the drawer of my nightstand and took out the brown notebook. It had a soft cover, worn smooth from years of use. Once it held grocery lists, birthdays, and small notes to remind me of appointments. Now it felt like the only witness I could trust. I turned to the page I had written last night. The ink had bled slightly where my hand trembled. The words stared back at me. If Mom just stopped existing. I traced the sentence with my fingertip. My handwriting looked foreign, too neat for what it contained. The weight of those words pressed down on me until the air itself seemed heavier. I shut the notebook and placed it on the nightstand beside my reading glasses. Downstairs, I could hear the faint clatter of dishes. Erica moved through the kitchen with her usual efficiency. I imagined her arranging plates, adjusting the lighting for a photo to post online. Her world was made of polished surfaces. Mine was made of things she didn't want to see. I walked to the mirror above the dresser. The woman reflected there looked older than I remembered. There were small lines around my mouth and the softness under my chin that comes from years of saying yes when I should have said no. My hair was streaked with silver, not the graceful kind that magazines call timeless, but the unstyled truth of someone who stopped being seen. I touched my cheek and thought of the times Daniel used to lean into my lap as a child, the weight of him heavy and trusting. He would press his fingers against my face and ask why I smiled even when I was sad. I told him that mothers smile so their children don't have to carry their storms. Now he was grown, and the storm had found me. A knock came at the door. No pause, no hesitation. It opened before I answered. "Morning," Daniel said, stepping halfway inside. He still smelled faintly of cologne and sleep. "Did you make coffee?" I shook my head. "Not yet." He frowned like I had missed a shift at work. "Erica's out of oat milk. If you're going to the store, could you grab some?" I nodded automatically. He smiled, relieved, and turned away. The door stayed open. When the sound of his footsteps faded, I closed it gently and leaned against it. That small gesture felt like rebellion. I wanted to scream that I had not volunteered to be their live-in assistant, that this room was not a favor, but a debt they owed me. The words burned behind my teeth, but I swallowed them. Instead, I sat down at the small desk near the window and began to write. I listed the errands they asked of me this week: grocery run, dry cleaning, pick up the children from school, wrap the presents Erica bought. Then below the list I wrote a single sentence: I am not the help. The sound of laughter floated up from the kitchen. Erica must have called a friend. Her voice had that bright edge it always took on when she was performing ease. I turned away from the sound and stared at the window. Outside, the mist was lifting, revealing the bare trees that framed the yard. The branches moved slightly in the wind, the same slow rhythm as breath. I remembered the house I once owned, with its porch swing and peeling blue paint. Robert used to sit there with a cup of coffee, telling me that kindness should never mean surrender. I had forgotten that. I pulled the notebook closer and opened to a new page. This time, I didn't write their words. I wrote mine. I wrote about the morning light on the snow, about how loneliness can hide behind routine, about the ache that comes when you realize you are both essential and unwanted. I wrote until my hand cramped and my eyes blurred. When I stopped, I felt lighter, like the notebook had absorbed a piece of the weight. It struck me then that I had spent years pretending this arrangement was mutual, that I was helping them and they were helping me. But as I looked around the sterile walls and the air that smelled faintly of other people's choices, I saw the truth. I wasn't part of their home. I was a worker who didn't get paid, a caretaker without a title, a ghost politely tolerated in a house I helped build. The realization did not bring tears this time. It brought clarity. Clarity can feel cruel at first, but it is the beginning of change. I placed the notebook on the desk where the light could touch it. The cover glowed faintly in the gray morning. It was small, ordinary, but it held the truth of my existence. It would keep my voice when I could not use it. I stood and smoothed the blanket on the bed, then straightened the chair, aligning it with the corner. Small acts of order in a world that no longer had space for me. Somewhere, deep inside, something steadied. For the first time in years, I whispered aloud to the empty room, "I am still here." The words hung in the air, fragile but alive. And the silence that followed was not emptiness. It was space. Space I could finally claim. There is a special kind of silence that settles over a house when you no longer belong to it. It is not empty silence, the kind that follows sleep or peace. It is the silence of being tolerated. Every sound you make feels like an interruption. Every breath a reminder that you are living on borrowed air. I remember the first winter after I moved in. Daniel had just been promoted, and Erica was 6 months pregnant with their second child. They needed help, and I needed a place to belong. It sounded like a solution for all of us. I told myself that families who live together stay stronger, that grandchildren grow better with a grandmother nearby. I believed that because I wanted to believe it. The first few months were warm, at least on the surface. I cooked dinners that filled the house with the smell of rosemary and garlic, the same way Robert used to like it. I read bedtime stories to the children, mended little tears in their clothes, and woke early to pack lunches before anyone else was up. It felt like purpose, like I had traded my old home for a new rhythm of usefulness. But usefulness is a fragile currency. It buys affection only as long as the need remains. One afternoon, Erica called me into the living room. She was standing near the fireplace, holding a picture frame with both hands. It was the photo of Robert and me on our wedding day, the one I had kept since 1976. His hair looked almost golden in the light, and I was laughing, caught mid-breath. "I think this should probably stay in your room," she said gently. "It doesn't really match the tone in here." "The tone?" I asked, confused. She gestured around the room. Everything was white and gray and precise, like a catalog page. Minimalist, clean, modern. The gold frame feels a bit heavy. I nodded, though my fingers tightened around the frame. I carried the photo back to my room and placed it on the dresser beside my bed. When I looked into our younger faces, I realized how long it had been since anyone looked at me with that kind of warmth. After that, the rules multiplied. I learned not to touch the thermostat, not to rearrange the pantry, not to use the guest bathroom if company was coming. When I forgot, there would be a soft sigh from Erica or a quiet, careful, "Mom, please," from Daniel, and I would shrink a little smaller. They didn't mean to make me invisible. That is what I told myself for years. They were busy, young, stressed. I understood. Mothers always understand. Until one day, I realized that understanding had turned me transparent. I began to notice how they moved around me. Erica passed by in her soft slippers, phone always in hand, talking about deadlines and photo shoots. Daniel sat on the couch at night, his face lit by the blue glow of a laptop. When I spoke, my words seemed to drift through them like steam that vanished before it reached their ears. Once, I asked if they wanted me to hang the children's drawings on the fridge. Erica smiled politely. "Maybe in your suite, Mom. I'm keeping the kitchen aesthetic consistent." Consistent. That word rang in my head like a bell without echo. That evening, I sat in my small room and looked at the walls. They were bare, except for one thing: Robert's old wooden chair. It was the only piece of furniture I refused to leave behind when I sold our home. He built it himself in our first year of marriage, a simple oak frame with a carved backrest shaped like a rising sunday. I used to sit in that chair with Daniel on my lap, teaching him how to draw. He would clutch a fat pencil in his small hand and press too hard, breaking the tip, and Robert would laugh and say that art always begins with a mess. The chair now sat in the corner, polished but unused. I sometimes placed my hand on its back as I passed, tracing the grooves Robert had carved decades ago. It felt like touching memory itself. One evening, Erica walked in without knocking. "You should probably move that chair somewhere else," she said. "It doesn't really fit." I smiled. "It fits me." She looked puzzled, then forced a small laugh. "Of course, I just meant the color." After she left, I sat in the chair for the first time in months. The wood was cool beneath my palms. I closed my eyes and could almost hear Robert's voice, low and steady. "Remember who you are, Maggie. The world forgets, but you don't have to." When I opened my eyes again, the room felt colder. The heater had clicked off, and through the vent, I could hear faint laughter from downstairs. I wondered if they ever mentioned me when I wasn't there. Probably not. People don't talk about furniture unless it breaks. Later that night, Daniel came to find me. He leaned against the doorway, his shoulders slouched with exhaustion. "Erica thinks we should keep the living room tidy for guests," he said carefully. "She didn't mean anything by it." "I know," I said, my voice calm. "Don't take it personally, Mom. You know how she gets about appearances." "I don't take it personally," I replied, though my hand was clenched so tightly around the armrest that the veins stood up like cords. He sighed. "You always make things heavier than they are." I looked up at him and smiled. "And you always make them lighter than they should be." He blinked, uncertain, then gave a short nod and left. When the door closed, I stayed in that chair for a long time. The house was quiet again, except for the whisper of wind along the eaves. I could smell the faint trace of cinnamon from the kitchen candles and the sharper scent of bleach from Erica's constant cleaning. The mixture made me dizzy. That night, I dreamed of the old house we once had. I dreamed of its blue walls and the porch swing that creaked when Robert pushed it too high. In the dream, I stood outside, looking in through the window. My younger self was inside, laughing, setting the table, humming to a song I had forgotten. She turned toward me but did not recognize who I was. I woke with a start, heart pounding. The dream felt too close to truth. Somewhere in the years of trying to be helpful, I had vanished from my own story. The morning light came pale through the blinds, stripes of silver across the floor. I sat in the wooden chair again and whispered to Robert, though he was long gone, "I think I became a ghost." The chair gave a small creak, as if it heard me. From the kitchen below came the sound of plates clinking and a child's voice calling for breakfast. The world was moving forward without me. I stood up, straightened my sweater, and looked once more at the empty walls. They reflected nothing back. I realized then that invisibility doesn't arrive all at once. It creeps in like fog until you can't tell where you end and the walls begin. And by the time you notice, you are already fading. That was the morning I decided that if I was to be a ghost, I would be one that haunted with purpose. The morning I discovered the truth. The sky over Ashwood was the color of cold metal. The air smelled of rain that had not yet fallen, and the house was quieter than usual. I stood at the kitchen counter, waiting for the coffee to finish brewing, when a single sheet of paper caught my eye. It was folded neatly on the corner of the table, beside a pile of mail that Erica had left there. I might have ignored it, but the bold red letters stopped me. Past due. The words were like a small explosion inside my chest. I set down my mug and unfolded the page. It was a notice from the mortgage company, dated 3 weeks earlier. The payment had been missed twice. The total owed sat at the bottom like a bruise I could not look away from. For a moment, I thought there must be some mistake. I had been helping them with the bills since I moved in. I sent money whenever Daniel said things were tight. Groceries, repairs, school fees, the car loan that was supposed to be short-term. I had sold my old house and given them $140,000 for the down payment. I even let Daniel handle the online payments because he said it would make things easier. Easier. That word rang in my head until it felt like mockery. I walked back to my room, the notice trembling in my hand. The heater clicked on as I sat at my desk and opened my laptop. The blue light spilled across the room, cold and unforgiving. I had not checked the joint account in months. There was no need, I thought. I trusted my son. Trust, I learned that morning, is the currency that drains fastest. When the page loaded, the numbers blurred. My account balance had withered to nearly nothing. I refreshed it once, twice, 3 times, but the result didn't change. The history told a story I had refused to see. Transfers to Daniel's account, withdrawals labeled house expenses, small purchases that added up to thousands. Every transaction was clean, recorded, and legitimate. There was no theft in the eyes of the bank, only consent I had given without realizing it. Each time Daniel had said, "Mom, could you help just this once?" I had answered yes. The quiet yes of a mother who still believed her child would never use her love as a key. The coffee smell drifted through the air, but it turned sour in my throat. I scrolled further, to an account I had opened years ago when Robert was still alive. We had called it the safety fund, meant for emergencies. Robert always said to keep a reserve for the days when life turns its back on you. I had not touched it since his funeral. When I checked, the number glowed faintly on the screen. $18,000. Still there, still untouched. A tiny island of survival in an ocean of betrayal. I leaned back in the chair, the notice still beside me, the laptop casting a pale light across my hands. I could see how thin the skin had become, blue veins branching like rivers under fragile glass. My heart was beating too fast. I tried to breathe, but every inhale caught halfway, like my lungs had forgotten the rhythm of calm. The sound of footsteps echoed from upstairs. Daniel's voice carried down the hallway. "Erica, where did you put the mortgage notice? I thought I paid it." Her reply was muffled. "Maybe your mom did. She always takes care of that stuff." My chest went tight. The word stuff landed harder than it should have. My life had been reduced to stuff. They talked for a while longer. I could hear fragments through the vent. "The emergency fund's empty," Daniel said. "Completely. I checked this morning." Erica's voice came lighter, almost joking. "What about her other one, the account she uses for gifts? She probably won't notice if you move a little from there." "And Ralph?" "She's old-fashioned," Daniel replied. "She still writes checks. Maybe she'll never know." I sat frozen, every muscle locked. My ears burned, and I could taste something bitter in the back of my mouth. It wasn't anger yet. It was disbelief, the kind that makes the world lose color. When the house fell quiet again, I stood and went to the closet. My knees shook as I reached up to the high shelf. There, under an old blanket, was the small tin box where I kept the most private pieces of my life. Robert's watch, a few letters, a faded photograph of us by the lake. Beneath them lay the thick brown envelope marked Plan B. I had almost forgotten it existed. Robert had sealed it himself, years before he died. He said it was only for emergencies, the kind that break the ground beneath your feet. I held it now, the paper warm against my palm from the heat of my skin. The edges were frayed, but the seal was unbroken. I sat on the bed, staring at it. In the quiet, I could hear Robert's voice again, steady and kind. Trust people with your heart, Maggie, but never with your security. I used to tease him for being too cautious. He would smile and say, "One day you'll thank me." That day had come. I ran my finger along the flap but didn't open it. Not yet. The envelope was more than paper. It was a promise that I was not powerless. It was proof that even in the years I had forgotten myself, Robert had remembered the woman he married. Outside, the rain finally began to fall, soft at first, then heavier. It tapped against the window like fingertips. I turned off the laptop, folded the notice, and placed both on the desk. My reflection in the screen looked strange, older and sharper. There were no tears now, just clarity. Daniel came downstairs an hour later. I heard him stop outside my door. "Mom, you up?" "Yes," I said. He opened the door a little. "Hey, about the bills. Things are tight right now, but after Christmas, I'll straighten it all out. Maybe we can talk about simplifying things, putting everything under one account so it's easier to manage." He smiled the same way he used to when he asked for money as a teenager, the practiced smile that carried both guilt and expectation. I looked at him for a long moment. "Easier for who?" "For all of us," he said quickly. "You wouldn't have to worry about keeping track. I'd handle it." I nodded slowly. "I'll think about it." He seemed relieved. "That's all I'm asking." But as he turned to leave, I added softly, "Just remember, Daniel, some things aren't yours to handle." He hesitated, confused, then shrugged. "Okay, Mom, whatever you say." When the door closed behind him, I finally let out the breath I had been holding. My hands no longer shook. They were steady, almost calm. I placed the envelope back into the box and closed the lid. The click of the metal latch sounded final, like a door closing on something I could never return to. That was the morning. The ache inside me began to change shape. It was no longer grief or humiliation. It was something colder and clearer. Determination. I looked at the envelope again and whispered into the quiet room, "It's time, Robert. I see it now." The rain fell harder, washing the dust from the window panes, and for the first time in years, I felt the air move through the house as if it belonged to me again. The next morning, I woke to the sound of rain still clinging to the world. The gutters whispered, and the gray light seeping through the curtains made everything look softer, almost merciful. I could not stay in that house another moment. The walls felt too close, the air too still. I needed a witness, someone who remembered the version of me that existed before I became useful, before I became quiet. I called Clara. Clara Bennett had been my friend for more than 30 years. We met at St. Agnes Church, long before arthritis found her knees and grief found me. She was the kind of woman who remembered birthdays and sent postcards from places she never really liked. After Robert died, she was the only person who didn't tell me to stay busy. She told me to rest. That was her gift, always, making permission feel holy. When I asked if she could meet, she didn't hesitate. "Of course, darling. The bakery on Maple Street, 11. The bell above the bakery door jingled as I stepped inside. The air smelled like sugar and butter and something warm enough to melt sadness. Clara was already there, sitting at the corner table by the window, her bright red scarf, a small rebellion against the gray day. She waved, and for a moment, I felt like someone had lit a candle inside my chest. "Margaret Hayes," she said as I approached. "I was starting to think I'd have to send a search party to that big house of yours." I smiled, the kind of smile that costs effort. "I'm afraid the house has swallowed me whole." She frowned gently. "I was worried about that. You sound thinner over the phone." "Sit down, love. You look like you've been carrying bricks." We ordered tea. When the waitress left, Clara leaned forward, her eyes sharp in the way only age and experience can make them. "All right," she said softly. "Tell me." At first, the words tangled in my throat, but once I began, they poured out like a flood. I told her about the overheard conversation, the missing money, the mortgage notice, the way Daniel looked at me with pity instead of respect. I told her about Erica's rules, The white walls, the photograph banished to my room. I even told her about the envelope Robert had left me, still sealed, still waiting. Clara listened without interrupting. Her hands stayed folded around her teacup, but her gaze never wavered. When I finished, she exhaled through her nose, a slow, deliberate sound. "They didn't just take your money," she said finally. "They took your dignity, and that, Margaret, is worse." The words hit me harder than I expected, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. Dignity is invisible until it is gone, and by the time you notice its absence, it feels too late to get it back. "I don't even know who I am anymore," I whispered. "I used to be capable, independent. Now I feel like a ghost that folds laundry." Clara reached across the table and took my hand. Her skin was warm, her grip firm. "You haven't disappeared," she said. "You've just been buried under other people's comfort, but you can dig yourself out. You still have power, Margaret. You still have your name on that deed, don't you?" I nodded, surprised she remembered. "Then start there," she said. "Don't fight them with anger. Fight them with paper, with facts. Let them choke on their own signatures." I laughed through the tightness in my throat. "You make it sound simple." "It isn't simple," she said, "but it is necessary. You don't have to destroy them. You only have to stop letting them destroy you." Our tea arrived. Clara had ordered chamomile, the same she always did. She pushed the second cup toward me. "Here, drink this. It's good for nerves." I wrapped my hands around the cup. The steam carried the scent of flowers and honey, a smell that felt like home before everything became cold. The first sip was almost too hot, but it slid down my throat like something alive, something patient. As I drank, a memory surfaced. Years ago, when Robert was building the wooden chair in our garage, he burned his hand on the sander. I rushed to help, panicking, but he just smiled and said, "It stings now so it can heal later." I realized that was what this tea was, a sting that promised healing. Clara watched me quietly. "You're thinking of him, aren't you?" "Always," I said. She smiled, then listened to what he would say. "Don't let grief make you gentle with people who don't deserve your kindness." Her words loosened something in me. I felt tears rise, not from sadness but from relief. It had been years since someone looked at me and saw strength instead of weakness. Tears slipped down my cheeks, soft and silent. Clara handed me a napkin and said nothing. After a moment, she reached into her purse and pulled out a small notepad. "I have a friend," she said, writing a name and number. "Her name is Nora Klein. She used to be a real estate attorney before she retired. Call her. Ask her to look over your ownership documents. Don't wait for permission. Just do it." I folded the paper and tucked it into my coat pocket. The edges felt sharp against my fingers, sharp enough to cut through the fog in my head. When we stood to leave, Clara hugged me longer than usual. "You don't owe anyone your silence," she whispered near my ear. "You earned your peace a long time ago. Go take it back." Outside, the rain had stopped. The sky was still heavy, but the air had that clean smell that follows a storm. I walked to my car slowly, holding the paper in one hand and the memory of the tea in the other. The warmth from the cup lingered in my palms long after I set it down. On the drive home, I kept thinking about what Clara said. Dignity. The word rolled through my mind like a bell. It had weight, like a door opening after years of being locked. I realized I didn't want revenge. I wanted restoration. I wanted to stand in a room and feel like it was mine again. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked different. Not smaller, not darker, but somehow less threatening. I could already see the cracks forming where control used to live. I walked inside quietly. Daniel was upstairs, and Erica was humming in the kitchen, her voice floating through the air like sugar that had turned to frost. I went straight to my room, opened the closet, and took out the tin box. The envelope was still there, sealed and patient. I placed it on the desk and laid Clara's note beside it. 2 pieces of paper, 2 paths forward. That night, as I sat by the window watching the lights from the neighboring houses, I brewed myself a cup of chamomile tea. The aroma filled the room, soft and forgiving. I held it close, feeling its heat seep into my hands, and whispered into the quiet, "I'm waking up." For the first time in years, the reflection in the glass didn't look like a ghost. It looked like a woman preparing to live again. The number for Nora Klein sat in my phone between Clara and Robert's old dentist. I had called Nora once when Robert and I were arguing with a contractor about a fence. She had fixed our problem with a sentence that felt like a safe place. When I pressed her name that morning, my thumb did not tremble. Nora answered on the third ring, her voice steady and warm. "Elaine, how are you this morning?" she asked. It was the same voice that had once explained easements and closing costs with a patience I admired. For a second, I wanted to say, "I was fine, everything was fine, please come over for tea." Instead, I breathed and told her the truth. I told her about the mortgage notice, about the empty emergency fund, about the transactions that read like confessions on a ledger. I told her about the sentence I had written in my notebook and how it had lived inside me all night. She listened. She did not sound shocked. She sounded factual. "Send me the documents," she said. "Scan what you have and email it. I will pull the property records and see what we are dealing with. Do not touch anything further. If you move money or change accounts, it could be used against you." I surprised myself by replying, "I have an envelope Robert left. It is sealed. I want to know if I have any standing before I open it." There was a pause on the line. I could hear the muffled sound of Nora shuffling papers on her end. "Elaine," she said softly, "you do, at least on paper. Your name is still on the deed, at 50% originally, but I always thought it was 45. Hold on, I will look it up." The click of typing was a small percussion through the phone. After a minute, she said, "Yes, your name is on the record, 45%. Daniel never filed the removal. He never completed the transfer. Legally, you are a co-owner." The room seemed to tilt. 45%. The number landed in me like a thrown rope. I clung to it. For years, I had imagined myself emptied, and now a legal fact brightened like a lantern in fog. "I am still here," the number said. "I still own a piece. Can I do something now?" I asked. "Yes," Nora replied. "We can file a notice of intent to sell or a notice of intent to enforce co-ownership. It will put them on record and it will start a clock. It will also make them take you seriously. If you want to, I can draft the documents and serve them to Daniel and Erica directly. You should be prepared for pushback. People who are used to taking will not give up easily." I felt a small, cold thrill run through me. For months I had been swallowed by their routine. Now there was a tool, a way to set boundaries that did not rely on their kindness. I thought of the envelope under the blanket in my closet and the paper Robert had sealed with his careful hand. It was proof and promise and permission all rolled into one. "Do it," I said. Nora's voice softened. "Are you sure? This will escalate things. It may make Christmas difficult. There could be anger. There could be shame. Are you prepared for that?" I pictured the darkened Christmas tree when the power went out because payments were missed. I pictured the way Erica's fingers had flicked at the photo of Robert as if a memory could be styled away. I pictured the ache of being treated like an account number instead of a person. I swallowed and said, "I am ready." "Good," Nora said. "I will draw up a notice of intent to sell and a demand for accounting of all transactions affecting the property and the joint accounts. I will file them tomorrow morning. I will also advise you on how to protect the small safety fund you mentioned. Do not do anything until I guide you. We will move deliberately." We spoke through details that felt both bureaucratic and intimate. Nora walked me through what service would mean, how the notice would be delivered, what responses we might expect. She said words like equitable interest and quiet title and partition sale. Each word was a tool, a measure I had not known I could wield. I took notes, careful and slow, as if I were learning to use a new instrument. When we hung up, the house seemed to breathe with me. I opened the closet and took out the envelope Robert had left. For the first time since I had found it, I felt no panic, only a clear purpose. The seal was unbroken. I put it into my handbag as if carrying a talisman. Then I went to the suitcase and unzipped it. I had not expected the action to feel ceremonial, but it did. My hands moved with a clarity I had not felt in years. I placed the passport, the little toiletries I knew I would need, a cash envelope with a modest sum for emergencies. I folded sweaters into squares, the same way I had folded towels in the laundry room countless times. Each movement felt like a stitch being mended in a garment that I had long thought ruined. When the phone buzzed, I answered without looking. It was Clara asking if I was all right. I told her quietly that I had spoken with Nora and that there would be papers soon. Clara said nothing but hummed a sound that meant solidarity. It was enough. I thanked her and hung up. The suitcase sat open on the bed. a quiet promise. I wrote a note and tucked it into my wallet in case I needed to leave quickly. I wrote very simply, to the point, as if making a list for someone else to follow. Give Nora power of attorney for the property. Do not interfere with bank holds. Keep the Plan B envelope sealed until we have a safe place to open it. The list read like a set of instructions for someone I trusted, someone who would not be swayed by guilt or tears. There is a moment in every plan where hesitation tries to creep in. It sits like a small animal at the edge of the path and looks at you with pleading eyes. I felt it there, a small voice asking what would happen to the grandchildren, to Daniel, to Erica. I felt the memory of nights when Daniel was small and sick, and I sat up with him. I thought of how easy it is for the world to shrink around the people you love and forget to include their dignity. I let the memory live, and then I turned my face from it. Choices have consequences, so do inactions. I had given until I had nothing left to offer. If taking this step meant that relationships would be hard, then hard would be a fair price for being seen. I walked through the room one last time. The wooden chair in the corner caught my eye. I ran my fingers across the carved back, feeling the familiar grooves. Robert had carved that rising sun with hands that were rough and patient. I touched the curve with the reverence of someone greeting an old friend. Then I placed a hand on the suitcase, closed it with a soft click, and zipped it. When I called Daniel that afternoon, it was not to ask for money or permission. I told him I had some errands to run. He asked where I was going, and I said only that I needed some air. He sounded relieved and not worried. I could hear the ordinary hum of his day in the background. It made my chest ache in a different way. Before I left the house, I slid the Plan B envelope into the pocket of my coat, where it would be safe from curious hands. I walked to the front door and paused. For a moment, the house looked like any other house on the block. Snow had started again, soft and clean. I breathed it in. The air tasted like possibility. I locked the door behind me. There was a sensation in the act that felt like a boundary being laid down. I had always been the one to open doors for others, to keep thresholds warm. Today I had closed one and it felt like reclaiming. The world outside was cold and bright. I set the suitcase in the trunk of my car, sat behind the wheel, and let the engine warm. Plan B was no longer an idea. It was a motion. It had a beginning and a course, and an agent who would move it forward. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel cruel. I felt something steadier. I felt the weight of my own name again. The day I decided to turn everything off, the world outside was bright with false cheer. The town of Ashwood had strung lights along Main Street, wrapping lampposts in red ribbons and gold stars. Music played from the speakers above the bakery, cheerful songs about home and love and the warmth of family. Every lyric felt like a dare. Inside my house, the scent of gingerbread candles and the faint hum of the dishwasher filled the air. Erica was fussing with garlands, arranging them so that every corner looked perfect for her photos. Daniel had taken the children out to buy last-minute presents. I moved through the house quietly, like someone visiting a museum of their own life. I stood for a long time in front of the Christmas tree. The lights blinked in rhythmic patterns, each one reflected in the polished ornaments. When I looked closer, I could see my face in them, small, warped, half hidden behind the glare. That afternoon, I opened my laptop and logged into the accounts. I canceled every automatic payment that had once kept this house running. The electricity, the gas, the phone, even the streaming services Erica adored. The cursor blinked on the screen like a heartbeat. Each cancellation felt like reclaiming one small piece of myself. The notice of intent to sell, drafted by Nora, was ready. I read it 3 times before printing it. The language was precise, legal, final. I folded it carefully, slid it into an envelope, and sealed it with my thumb pressed hard against the flap. My hand shook a little, but not from fear. It was the tremor of resolve. By evening, I had dropped the envelope into the mailbox at the end of the driveway. The snow had started again, soft and soundless. Streetlights blurred in the flakes. When I came back inside, the warmth of the house hit me like an accusation. That night, I packed the rest of my things. I worked in silence, the kind that stretches thin between thoughts. Each sweater folded neatly, each book chosen with care. I left behind what belonged to them. The perfect dishes, the framed quotes about family, the endless candles that smelled like someone else's idea of peace. I did not sleep. I sat by the window and watched the snow settle on the driveway, thick and unbroken. Around midnight, I turned off the lights and let the house slip into darkness. The Christmas tree blinked for a few seconds longer before I pulled the plug. The room fell quiet. It was strange how calm I felt. There was no triumph, no bitterness, only a clarity as cold and clean as the snow outside. I thought of Robert's chair in the corner, his words carved into the wood like a secret prayer. Rise with the Sunday. I touched it once before going to bed. At dawn, the sound of chaos woke me. Erica's voice carried up the stairs, sharp and frantic. What do you mean the power's off? It's Christmas Eve. Daniel was muttering in the background. I thought you paid it. I thought Mom did. I don't know. I rose, dressed slowly, and opened my door. The air in the hallway was colder than usual. The house felt different without its hum of electricity. Even the refrigerator's silence sounded accusing. I walked downstairs to find them both in the kitchen, faces flushed, arguing in half sentences. Erica slammed a cabinet door. My mother is flying in today. How are we supposed to host anyone in the dark? Daniel rubbed his forehead, exhausted. The payments were automatic. They should have gone through. They didn't, she snapped. And whose name is the account under? Hers. They both turned when they saw me. Mom, Daniel said, his voice thin with frustration. Did you cancel the payments? I met his eyes. Yes. Erica blinked, confused. Why would you do that? Because it is time you learned what it feels like to live without what isn't yours. She opened her mouth to argue, but I held up my hand. Don't. This isn't a fight, it's a correction. Daniel took a step forward, his voice softer now. Mom, it's Christmas. You can't just… I can, I said, and I did. The silence that followed was heavy, the kind that hums just before something breaks. Outside, snow was falling again, coating the porch in white. I looked at it through the window, at how beautiful everything appeared when covered. Even decay looked pure under snow. Erica's voice cracked. What are we supposed to tell the kids? I turned to her. Tell them the truth, that some gifts come at a cost, that generosity is not the same as obligation. Daniel shook his head. You're punishing us. No, I said. You punished yourselves when you mistook kindness for weakness. My Christmas gift to you this year is silence. The words came out calm, but they landed with weight. Erica stared at me as if I had spoken another language. Daniel's eyes softened with something between disbelief and guilt. For a long moment, no one moved. The children's laughter echoed faintly from upstairs, unaware of what had shifted. I wanted to hold on to that sound, to remember that innocence still lived somewhere inside this house. But I knew that even laughter could turn brittle when built on lies. I turned away and walked to the tree. Without the lights, it looked smaller, duller. The ornaments caught what little light came from the windows, but they no longer shimmered. I could see the reflection of my own shadow among them, tall and still. I bent down and picked up one ornament, a small glass heart Daniel had made when he was a boy. It had a tiny crack down one side. I ran my thumb over it, feeling the ridge. Some things, once broken, could not be repaired, but they could still be handled gently. When I looked back, Erica was crying quietly. Daniel had his hands pressed to the counter, head bowed. The power outage had done what years of pleading never could. It made them stop. It made them listen. Nora's email had already gone out that morning. They would receive it soon, with the notice of intent to sell and the full accounting request. They would see the truth written in language that could not be debated. I walked toward the staircase, feeling the soft give of the carpet under my feet. Halfway up, I turned to them once more. You wanted me gone, I said softly. Now you will learn what absence really feels like. Neither of them replied. In my room, I finished zipping the suitcase. The envelope labeled Plan B rested on top. I placed it into my handbag, the sound of the clasp clicking shut louder than the silence below. Through the window, the street shimmered under the snowfall. The neighborhood lights twinkled faintly, but our house was dark. From a distance, it would look abandoned. In a way, it already was. That evening, I brewed a small cup of tea. The power was gone, but the gas stove still worked. I sat beside the window, holding the warm cup between my hands, and watched the shadows stretch across the snow. It struck me that the darkness was not a punishment. It was a mirror. Every bulb that had once lit this house had been powered by me, by my giving. Without it, they would finally see the shape of what they had taken. I whispered to myself, "Merry Christmas." The words did not sound bitter, they sounded like closure. And for anyone listening who has ever been made to feel like a burden, remember this: you are not disposable. You are not defined by what others take from you. You still have the power to rewrite your story, to choose peace over permission, and to turn off the lights when they no longer warm you. The plane touched down in Lisbon, under a sky the color of apricots. The air shimmered with light that seemed to come from both the sun and the sea, a kind of brightness that felt alive. I carried only one suitcase, and my handbag, small enough to remind me that I had finally learned how to travel light, in every sense of the word. Lucia met me just beyond customs. She had been one of Robert's oldest friends from his years studying architecture in Portugal. I remembered her from a photograph he used to keep on his desk, two students laughing by the Tagus River, her curls wild, his smile easy. She had aged gracefully, her face now lined in the way of people who have lived honestly. She hugged me tightly. "Margaret, my dear, look at you," she said, pulling back to study my face. "You've lost weight, but your eyes look awake. Maybe that's what happens when you finally sleep without fear," I said. Lucia smiled as if she understood. "Come, the apartment is ready. It isn't grand, but the view is worth everything." We drove through narrow streets where laundry hung like flags of everyday life from the balconies. The air smelled of baked bread and sea salt. Lisbon was old but not tired, like a woman who still dressed in color just because she could. I pressed my forehead to the window as the car climbed a steep hill, catching glimpses of the river below. The water was silver in the fading light, wide and patient. Lucia's apartment sat on the top floor of a terracotta building, overlooking the Tagus. When she opened the door, the first thing I saw was the balcony, open to the golden air. The sound of a distant guitar drifted from somewhere down the street, mingling with the cry of gulls. "Stay as long as you like," she said, handing me the keys. "I'm going to my sister's for a few weeks. It will do you good to be alone." I wanted to protest, to insist she stay, but she shook her head. "You need to hear your own silence before it becomes peace." When she left, the apartment was filled with the kind of stillness that doesn't frighten you. I unpacked slowly, folding each item as if laying down pieces of an old life. My notebook rested on top of the dresser. I placed it beside a small vase of fresh daisies Lucia had left on the table. Then I stepped out onto the balcony. The view took my breath away. The sun was sinking behind the bridge, streaking the sky in rose and amber. Boats drifted on the river like moving shadows. Somewhere below, a street musician was playing a melancholy melody on a guitar. It floated upward and seemed to fill the air between my ribs. For the first time in years, I did not feel invisible. I felt anonymous, and that was entirely different. In anonymity, there is possibility. That evening, I boiled water for tea. The kettle whistled, and the sound made me smile. I poured the hot water into a chipped porcelain cup and dropped in a chamomile bag I had brought from home. The scent rose softly, reminding me of Clara and her words. "They took your dignity. Take it back." I carried the cup to the balcony. The light had turned liquid now, spreading gold across the rooftops. I sat down and opened my notebook. The first page I saw was still the one where I had written Daniel's sentence months earlier. I ran my fingers over the faded ink. It no longer stung. It simply existed, like a scar you forget until the weather changes. I turned to a new page. The paper felt smooth under my hand. I wrote slowly, carefully, as if each word needed air. I didn't die. I simply stopped living for those who wanted me gone. When I finished, I closed the notebook and whispered the words aloud. They tasted strange, almost sweet. I looked out at the river again. The sun was gone now, but its echo lingered on the water. Later that night, I walked through the narrow streets near the apartment. The air was cool, carrying the mingled scents of roasted chestnuts and salt. People passed by in small groups, laughing, their voices soft in the stone corridors. I felt invisible among them, but in a way that felt safe. No one here knew me as a burden, a caretaker, or a source of money. I was simply a woman walking. When I returned home, I lit a single candle and let its glow fill the small kitchen. I found a piece of paper in the drawer and wrote to Clara. "Dear Clara, Lisbon feels like a place where even silence has color. I am drinking tea as I write this, and the cup warms my hands in a way that feels like forgiveness. I thought freedom would feel like noise, like celebration, but it feels more like rest. I am learning to breathe again. I folded the letter and set it aside. I would send it tomorrow. For now, I wanted to sit with the quiet. As I prepared for bed, I passed by the mirror and caught my reflection. My face looked softer, not younger, but less strained. I noticed how my shoulders no longer curled inward, as if protecting a wound. I touched the glass lightly and said, "You made it." That night, I dreamed of Robert. We were walking along the river, the same as in the photo he once kept. He turned to me and said, "You did well, Maggie. You remembered who you were." I reached for his hand, and though I couldn't feel it, the warmth stayed. When I woke, the first light of morning was spilling through the window. The city was beginning to stir, the sound of footsteps and bicycle bells floating up from the street. I opened the balcony doors and let the air in. It smelled like bread, salt, and something new. I brewed another cup of tea and sat with my notebook. On the next page, I wrote one word in bold letters, freedom. Then I underlined it, once, twice, until the ink deepened. Freedom, I realized, is not the absence of love. It is the presence of self. It is the quiet knowledge that you can still belong to the world without belonging to someone else's version of you. As I looked out over the Tagus, sunlight glimmered across the water, and a faint wind lifted the edge of the page. I smiled, letting it turn itself to a blank one. The future, waiting to be written. The message arrived just after sunrise. I had been standing on the balcony, watching the city blush awake, when my phone vibrated against the table. For a moment, I thought it might be Clara or Nora, but the name that appeared on the screen stopped my breath. Daniel. There was only one line. "Mom, you ruined us." I stared at the words for a long time. They were small, harmless looking, almost ordinary, yet they carried the weight of everything I had been carrying for years. I thought of all the sentences that had come before. "You should rest, Mom. You're overreacting, Mom. Don't make it hard, Mom." This one was different. It wasn't a dismissal or an excuse. It was an admission, though he did not mean it that way. I set the phone face down on the table and poured my tea. Outside, the city had begun to hum with its own rhythm, the distant sound of vendors opening their stalls, church bells marking the hour, a dog barking in the alley below. Lisbon did not care about my son's message. The world was wide enough to hold both my loss and my relief. A few minutes later, another sound cut through the morning. The soft chime of an email notification. I opened my laptop. The sender was Nora Klein. The subject line read, "Transfer confirmation." The body of the message was simple and formal. "Dear Margaret, the property sale has been finalized. Your portion, 45% of the total, has been transferred to your account as of this morning. Please confirm receipt at your convenience. Warm regards, Nora." I read it twice, letting each word settle. Finalized. Transferred. Yours. It was not the money itself that made my chest tighten. It was the acknowledgement. For the first time in years, something belonged to me without condition. I opened my banking app and saw the numbers appear like quiet proof of survival. I closed it quickly, not wanting to feel greedy, only grounded. When I looked up again, the light had changed. The river below glimmered, and the reflection of the bridge stretched across it like a silver scar. I thought about Daniel and Erica waking in their new apartment, smaller, colder, maybe quieter. I thought about how it might feel for him to see the space he once called home slip through his fingers. I did not wish him pain, but I did wish him understanding. The phone buzzed again, another message, this time from Clara. The preview line glowed on the screen. "You won't believe what happened at church today." I opened it. "Margaret, word has spread here. Someone from the congregation told your story during the fellowship meeting yesterday. They didn't use names, but everyone knew. Women who have been silent for years stood up and spoke. One of them said she was finally going to tell her daughter-in-law no, for the first time in a decade. Another said she would move back into her own apartment. People cried. Even Father Bennett teared up. He said, "Your courage reminded him that love without respect is not love at all. Everyone feels like they've been awakened. You did that." I read it 3 times, my eyes blurring until the words shimmered. I could almost hear Clara's voice, steady and bright, carrying across the ocean. For a long moment, I sat still, holding the phone, as if it were something sacred. The idea that my quiet rebellion, born out of exhaustion and heartbreak, had rippled into other lives was almost too large to grasp. I had not set out to be an example. I had only wanted peace. But maybe peace, once claimed, becomes contagious. I walked to the balcony again. The sun was climbing now, the sky a soft blue brushed with gold. Below, a fisherman cast his net into the water, the motion smooth and practiced. He reminded me of Robert in the garden, his patience, his belief that small actions done steadily could change the course of a day. I went inside, opened my notebook, and turned to the page where I had written freedom. Beneath it, I wrote another line. Sometimes freedom begins when you stop apologizing for needing it. The words felt right, complete. I closed the notebook gently and held it against my chest. It had begun as a record of pain, but now it was something else entirely, a testament. Later that afternoon, I walked to the riverside. The air smelled of salt and baked stone. Couples strolled hand in hand, children ran after pigeons, and a man played soft fado on his guitar. I found a bench near the water and sat down, watching the sunlight tremble on the waves. I thought of all the women like me, mothers, grandmothers, caretakers, who had been told to stay quiet, to be grateful, to accept less because love demanded it. I imagined them hearing my story in that church in Ohio, their hands trembling, their hearts waking up after years of stillness. I whispered to the wind, "You're not invisible. You were never invisible." For the first time, I meant it not only for myself. As evening fell, I returned to the apartment and made another cup of tea. I sat by the window and watched the lights come alive across the river, each one reflected in the dark water like a heartbeat. The city buzzed softly, full of life that no longer felt separate from my own. I picked up my phone again, looked at Daniel's message one more time, and finally replied, "No, Daniel, I didn't ruin you. I stopped saving you." I pressed send, set the phone aside, and breathed. There was no trembling, no guilt. Only the steady calm of someone who has learned that sometimes love is letting others feel the consequences of their own choices. Outside, a street musician began to play again. The melody was slow, full of longing and hope intertwined. I listened until the notes faded into the night. Then I opened my notebook one last time for the day and wrote, "This is what freedom sounds like." And to anyone out there, reading or listening to anyone who has ever been told that kindness means surrender, remember this: your goodness is not a resource to be drained. Your love is not a debt to be collected. If you believe that the strength of women and mothers deserves respect, not exploitation, tell me where you are watching from. Let our voices meet across distance. Let us remind the world that we are still here, listening, rising, and free. I waited until the afternoon light softened into that tender Lisbon gold before I began the final letter. The apartment was quiet except for the hush of the river and the soft lift of wind through the curtains. I set the notebook on the table, placed a fresh sheet of paper beside it, and wrote my grandchildren's names at the top. Just seeing them there steadied my hands. My loves, I have learned something I wish someone had told me when I was young. Real love is not giving until you are empty. Real love is knowing when to stop before you disappear. I am writing this so you never mistake silence for kindness or sacrifice for proof that you are worthy. You are worthy the moment you arrive in this world, and you do not have to spend your life earning what should already be yours. I told them about the house without naming anyone a villain. I told them how easy it is to drift into roles that seem generous but are really cages. I told them that a boundary is not a wall but a door you close gently so you can sleep. I told them how I once believed that the way to keep a family together was to become invisible inside it, and how wrong that turned out to be. Then I wrote the sentence that had lived in me since the day I left. Love is not measured by how much you give until there is nothing left. It is measured by how you protect the part of you that must endure. Learn to pause, learn to say no, learn to be tender to yourself first, because the you that remains is the only home you will ever truly own. I folded the letter once and then again so it would fit in the small envelopes I had bought that morning from the corner shop. Each envelope looked ordinary, which felt right. Most of the miracles in my life have arrived looking like errands. Dusk gathered. The river turned from silver to indigo, and the first bridge lights blinked on in a quiet chain. I carried my tea to the window and sat on the ledge. The breeze lifted the hem of the curtain and brushed my wrist, cool and almost playful. Below, a boy practiced scales on a trumpet. He missed a note and tried again. The effort made me smile. It sounded like hope learning its shape. I thought of the women who stood up at Clara's church and spoke after years of holding their stories inside like breath. I pictured kitchens across small towns where a grandmother turned off the stove and sat down because her feet hurt and her time mattered. I pictured a mother of 3 moving her old dresser back into her own apartment, filling it with folded shirts that smelled like soap and relief. The private little rebellions that will never make the news but will save a life anyway. When the telephone rang, I let it go to voicemail and listened as Daniel's voice filled the room. His words were soft and careful, the way people speak when they are not sure if the door is still open. He said the kids asked about me. He said they missed the way the house smelled when I baked. He said I did the right thing for myself and that he was still learning how to do the right thing for his family. He did not ask for money. He asked if I would send the children a story. I pressed the phone to my heart and closed my eyes. For a moment I felt the ache of what could have been, and then I felt the steady warmth of what still might be. I walked back to the table, opened the notebook, and began a new page. I wrote a story about a river that remembers every stone it passes and keeps going anyway. I wrote about a wooden chair with a back carved like a rising sun and a little boy who learned to draw in it. I wrote about a woman who thought leaving meant failing until she learned that sometimes leaving is the only way to arrive. I promised to send the story with a photograph of the Tagus so they could see the way light holds water without breaking it. Night deepened. Somewhere, a woman sang a fado so gentle even the windows seemed to listen. I signed the letters and sealed the envelopes. On the back of each one, I wrote, in small script, "You are allowed to be whole." I returned to the window. The room smelled faintly of tea and sea salt. The wind moved the curtain again, and I felt it across my cheek like a blessing. I lifted the notebook and wrote the last lines of my own chapter, not with anger, not with triumph, but with the quiet certainty that comes when a path has been walked to its end. I did not walk away. I walked home to myself. The pen rested. The page shone softly in the lamplight. I could feel the old fear somewhere behind me, a shadow I no longer owed rent. In its place was a different presence, wide and still, like the river at night. I sat there a long time, listening to Lisbon breathe, feeling my own breath keep pace. Tomorrow I will mail the letters. I will send the story. I will take a photograph for the children of the bridge, lit like a necklace. I will buy fresh bread and a handful of oranges from the street market and ask the vendor how he keeps his hands so warm. I will keep this small, steady life I have chosen, and I will protect it as if it were a new flame. If you are listening to me now, wherever you are, know this. You are not the sum of what was taken from you. You are not the ledger of what you gave. If my story has reached you, let it be a hand on your back as you stand. Share it so another woman hears it at the exact hour she needs to. Tell us where you are watching from, so we can learn how far a voice can travel when it stops apologizing for itself. We gather here to remember that self-worth is not a luxury. It is the ground. This has been my final chapter for a while, but not my last. On Grandma's final chapter, we tell these truths so that older adults can live with dignity, joy, and independence. If you want more of these stories, if you want a place where your courage is ordinary, stay with us. Come back tomorrow. Bring a friend who needs to hear her own name spoken with respect. The wind moved through the room again, and the white curtain lifted like a sail. Across the river, a light went out in a window, and another one came on. I closed my notebook, rested my palm on the cover, and felt a quiet pulse under my hand, steady as tide. Reborn is not a sudden blaze. It is the moment you realize the door has always opened inward. Every story leaves an echo, and maybe this one found its way to a quiet corner of your heart. Margaret's journey reminds us that it is never too late to reclaim our worth, to draw boundaries with love, and to begin again no matter our age or the miles behind us. If you have ever felt invisible, forgotten, or silenced, remember, your voice still matters. Tell your story, because someone out there needs to hear it to find their own strength. If this story touched you, please like this video, share it with someone who believes in second chances, and subscribe to Grandma's Final Chapter. Every new subscriber helps us bring more stories of courage, healing, and hope to light. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next story, one that might feel a little like your own. Together, we're building a community where every chapter, no matter how late in life, still matters.